All right. Our speakers today will include Dr. Daniel Doyle. He's with Physicians for a National Health Program of West Virginia. Sally Roberts, who's with Rise Up West Virginia. Gary Zuckett with West Virginia Citizen Action Group. And myself, Eve Markham Atkinson with West Virginia Citizen Action Group. Before we get into this too far, we will be plugging a couple of things several times throughout the webinar. We highly encourage everyone to join our petition, to sign our petition to HHS Secretary Becerra. And it's tinyurl.com/MMAWV. And then we would love for you to share your healthcare story with us. And that is at tinyurl.com/WVstories21. Sally, would you like to take it for us?
Yes, thank you so much. Tonight we're here because we're asking that Secretary Becerra and President Biden help us make meds more affordable. And why are we here asking for this? Because nearly 1 in 4 Americans, nearly 18 million, cannot afford the medications they need, which are sold in other countries for half the price. This burden is disproportionately felt by Black and Brown communities, individuals who tend to be sicker and lower income are most likely to ration their medicine, which can result in negative health consequences, including death. So why are medications so expensive? There are a couple of reasons. A few reasons include patents, monopolies, and corporate greed.
Take it away, Gary.
Okay, I will. I guess what I'm here to do is talk a little bit about the Make Med Affordable campaign. And this Make Med Affordable campaign, it's a coalition project at the national level between People's Action and dozens of organizations around the country. Some of these organizations driving this project include People's Action, like I said, the Action Center on Race and the Economy, the Center for Popular Democracy Fund, Indivisible, Prep for All, Public Citizen, Social Security Works, and T1 International. And you can find out more about this campaign at makemedsaffordable.org. And why does this coalition exist? Basically to address the abuses that the pharmaceutical industry is doing to us, and to ensure that people can access and afford their prescriptions. In our nation, the prescription drug corporations continue to raise prices on our medicines that are already too expensive for many people to afford. Households face impossible decisions such as whether to buy groceries or pay for a prescription. In fact, 1 in 4 Americans report rationing a medication due to cost. And these high prices persist because of the monopoly power of drug corporations. And these corporations are making money on the taxpayer's dime. The National Institute of Health spends $40 billion in public funds on research and development a year. And then the drug companies turn around and patent these drugs and charge high prices for them. And in fact, the recent Newsweek article really showed that the drug companies are the most profitable companies in America. In between 2000 and 2018, they took in $8.6 trillion in profits. And and they also hire an army of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Just this year, in pushing back against the prescription drug negotiations that was in the IRA bill, they spent over $100 million this year lobbying against the passage of that legislation that would just merely allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs the way that the administration for veterans already does. So, pharma has a really big reach and a lot of influence in Washington, and that's why we're, working with this national coalition to get the Biden administration to take things into their own hands and not wait for Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. So, high prescription drug prices. How does this affect Americans? Well, we spend more on prescription drugs than anyone else in the world. I think the average cost are about $1,200 per person per year. And, it's true that Americans take a lot of pills. But what really sets the U.S. apart from most other countries is high prices. Cancer drugs in the U.S. routinely cost $10,000 a month. Even prices for old drugs have spiked as companies have bought up medicines that face no competition and boosted charges. While private insurers and government programs pick up the biggest share of the bill, high drug costs are ultimately passed on to members of the public through the premiums they pay to keep their insurance policies active and through the taxes they pay to the government. In a February poll, nearly a third of respondents said a candidate's position on lowering drug costs was the most or among the most important issues influencing their vote in the November general election. 1 in 3. And 80% of adults believe prescription drugs are unreasonably expensive. So we've got 3 things that are really compounding the problem right now. We've got monopolies. Government-granted monopolies mean only a few corporations can make and sell the drugs we need. We've got patents. Patents give corporations the power to set prices because we can't get our medications anywhere else. And consequences. Americans pay more than 2.5 times as much for prescription drugs than people in other countries. So how are we going to solve the problem of high prescription drug prices? Well, one tool in our toolbox is compulsory licensing. Compulsory licensing through march-in rights and executive action. The primary objective of this campaign is to urge Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra to make meds affordable. How can he do this? Well, the federal government has the authority under existing law to authorize price-cutting generic competition with expensive patented drugs. Such a step can decrease cost while increasing supply of a drug. 8 in 10 voters support breaking patent monopolies to reduce drug prices. 8 in 10. People's Action recently published a roadmap that provides more detail about the options available to Secretary Becerra and the Biden administration. And we can provide those links with a copy of this presentation that we'll post online hereafter, and we can make sure to email it out to you, no problem. So they have 2 options here. The Biden's administration's executive powers can help to make meds affordable. The first is the government patent use option. The government has the authority to use any patented invention in exchange for reasonable compensation. Existing law, they can do it, and they have done it. March-in rights allows the government to introduce additional producers when the patents on a medicine resulted from government funding. And as we mentioned in a previous slide, the NIH provides a lot of research funding for a lot of these corporations. You know, they apply for the grant, they get the grant, they do the research. So they have resulted, these patents have resulted from government funding. So we have options there as well. So President Biden and Health and Human Services Secretary Becerra can do this right now without Congress. I know you're all home by yourself right now. Raise your hand by yourself. Nobody needs to see you, but raise your hand if you think that Congress is going to get it done right now. I'm guessing there's not a lot of hands up right now. Well, a lot of people have a lot of unhappy feelings about the productivity of our current Congress. And when you're dealing with partisan politics, it can really slow down legislation from getting passed and even stop it. So how do we get around that? Well, we can rely on march-in rights and the government's ability to authorize the use of a patent. We can do that right now without Congress. That's the big deal right there. So how has the government done this before? The simple answer is yes. During the anthrax scare in 2001, George W. Bush publicly considered lifting the patent for a critical antibiotic, which led the manufacturer to cut the price in half. Just threatening to lift the patent made the manufacturer drop the price. The government used this power throughout the 1960s to make patented drugs available at lower cost. And the US government has lifted patents on things like night vision goggles, electronic passports, lead-free bullets, and other products. So they obviously do this on the regular. Can I have a pair of night vision goggles? Apparently I can, and it can be made from a generic manufacturer. Here's another big thing. In 2017, Louisiana's Secretary of Health began simply to explore whether she could ask the federal government to lift the patent on hepatitis C cures. With that put power in her hands. And so she was able to negotiate major discounts. More Louisiana residents received the cure in the next 75 days than in the entire previous year. So we have a history of using these tools to make change happen, and fairly rapidly. Right now with our program, our Make Meds Affordable campaign, we're just starting off with this project. And so we've targeted 6 drugs. The 6 drugs are Xandy, which is a prostate cancer medication, Paxolavid, which is an antiviral for dealing with COVID-19, Epclusa, which is a medication for hepatitis C, Descovie, which is an HIV medication, Symbicort, which is a medication for asthma, and insulin. We have so many diabetics in this state. Anything that we can do to bring down the price of insulin is going to be felt by so many, and it's going to relieve the burden on them. Well, we have an interview with someone that's coming up very shortly. Her story is very moving, so please stay. Before we move on to the next section with Dr. Dan Doyle, he's going to go into a little more detail about those medications. But I just want to plug our 2 links. Sign our petition at tinyurl.com/MMAWV, Make Meds Affordable, WV, MMA. And then share your healthcare story with us. tinyurl.com/WV stories21. All righty, Dan, do you want to take it away? You'll want to unmute.
Thanks, Eve. There we go. So my job is to just talk a little bit about the 6 different drugs or drug categories that Eve just spoke to you about. But before I do that, I want to just comment on a couple of things I've heard so far. So I'm a family physician. I practiced at New River Health Center, which is a federally qualified health center, a community health center here in Fayette County. I live in Fayette County. And I served as a family physician there for over 40 years and only just retired this year. And one of the things that I heard was the point that even old medicines, even sort of established old medicines, have been bought up by companies and then the price is raised. And this is one of the things that most shocked me over the last 10 to 15 years of practice. When there would, and an example I can think of is a medicine called Colchicine, which was a gout medicine. This was an extremely inexpensive generic medicine, cost probably $3 or $4 for a course of treatment, which was just a few pills when a person was so miserable with a swollen, painful toe that they couldn't walk. And we saw that medicine. What happened was the company that was making the generic stopped making it. And so it was only available back to the company that was making it by brand. And that medicine, which was the first line medicine for gout, became virtually unavailable. It went from like $3 or $4 to $100 just overnight. And so we basically stopped using it. Another infamous example here in West Virginia is the way that Mylan Pharmaceuticals got hold of EpiPen, which was an immediate emergency life-saving medicine that was used for many children and adults who had life-saving reactions, life-threatening reactions to bee stings. And so people who could literally die in minutes from a bee sting would use this EpiPen to self-inject. And that, I forget the price, but it went from in double figures to triple figures. And that was courtesy of Heather Bresch, who was running Mylan at the time, and later moved it offshore to the Netherlands to not have to pay taxes. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The other thing is that we've been talking about patents, and Eve explained how one of the things that the government has the ability and authority to do right now is to march in on patents. The way patents work now is that when a drug company brings out a new drug, they have 17 years that nobody else can make that drug. Only they can make that drug. It's on patent, so you can only get the brand of that drug. So, for example, when Lipitor first came out, or when these Hep C drugs that we're going to talk about first came out, they were only available as brand drugs, and so they had 17 years before any other generic manufacturer could make these for a more affordable price. And so they always took advantage of that exclusive rights, that monopoly to set prices high. But in the last 10 years, there has simply been no bounds. It used to be that an expensive drug was $100. Now an expensive drug can be $1,000 a dose. I mean, it's totally out of this world. It's crazy. And yet, the way the laws stand, they're getting away with it. When the Bush administration introduced Medicare Part D to have Medicare partly cover the cost of prescription drugs, that seemed like a very good thing. But in the fine print that the pharmaceutical companies demanded and got, before they would allow that to be passed, was a provision that the government would never negotiate prices on drugs. The government would never do what can be done in Canada, what can be done in Europe, what is done with the VA, as Gary pointed out. So they got a promise that drug prices would never be negotiated. And then they proceeded to jack up prices so that they've gotten out of reach of regular people. So as you heard, the Make Meds Affordable project has chosen 6 drugs. So the first one on Eve's list is this Xtandi. This is probably the drug on the list that is used for the fewest number of people, but it's one of these brand new drugs that, as you can see, it says net price was $129,000. So that means that they would actually bill the person's health insurance $129,000 a year to be on this drug. Only half the population is ever going to be a candidate to use this drug, males, and of them, it's not all prostate cancer patients. It's a small subset of prostate cancer patients who are resistant to other treatments. But this is an example of how fabulously expensive cancer drugs can be. The next drug on the list is one of 3 of the drugs. 3 of the 6 drugs are actually used for infectious diseases. Paxolavid is one that there's probably people on this webinar who've actually used this or had family members to use this, because beginning probably in late 2021, there started to be a drug that you could take if you got sick with COVID. In the beginning, we didn't have that. And so Pfizer brought this drug to market toward the end of 2021. $530 a course, and a course lasted about 1 week. So this is a great example of, you used to go to the doctor and have a strep throat and they'd prescribe amoxicillin or penicillin. You'd go to the store and you'd get your amoxicillin or penicillin for $10. Or you had a urinary tract infection, you'd get your Bactrim for $5 or $10. Now here's a drug for an infection, frightening, infecting millions of people, and they're gouging us for $530 for a single treatment, which is shameless, but the system is set up to allow that, unless the administration intervenes. The next drug on the list is another infectious disease drug. It's called Descovie. This is a drug that people who are at risk for HIV because of their sexual lifestyle or sexual practices, that prevents people getting HIV. So this is an extremely important drug, being aggressively promoted by the federal government and the CDC because it can reduce people developing HIV. As it says there, it reduces risk of getting HIV by 99%, which is wonderful, but it's a medicine you have to take every day. So you take 1 pill every day. There are 3 medicines available right now for what's called PrEP, which is prevention of HIV. This one, there's another one called Truvada. Both of them are pills that you take once a day. And then there's an injectable drug that you take every other month. But all 3 of them are still on patent, brand only, extremely expensive. And even though the drug company has programs, if you go to their website, we'll help you get this. You can get this for free. It's basically just PR, because they do help some people who have to have income qualifications, jump through hoops to get it. But there's many other people who go to the doctor, get a prescription, find out the cost, and either can't get it or will take it for a short time and then have to go off it and therefore be exposed to HIV. The price per dose of this we don't have, but it's in the thousands of dollars. Next drug is Epclusa. And this is the 3rd of the infectious disease drugs on the list. This is a treatment for Hep C, hepatitis C. 10 years ago, if you had hepatitis C, there were some ineffective cures that really caused a lot of nausea and were difficult to take. And then about about 8 years ago, these miracle drugs came on the market, and they are wonderful drugs because they actually cured hepatitis C, and it was easy to cure hepatitis C with these drugs. But as you can see here, the cost is $85 to produce, but $1,000 per pill to take. So again, many people go to the doctor, get a prescription, can't afford these. And basically, when I had patients where we were prescribing these drugs for them, we had to get them enrolled in a special program, or if they had Medicaid, we had to go through filling out a whole bunch of forms. So there were barriers and obstacles that made it difficult to get these. And the reason for creating barriers and obstacles is that some people just give up, and they did. Next drug on our list is a medicine that many, many millions of people take. This has been one of the most profitable drugs of all time, Symbicort. This is an asthma medicine, but lots of people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or black lung are prescribed this medicine. It's a medicine you take every day, all the time, to prevent asthma attacks. It's a very effective medicine. It's a combination drug of a cortisone type of medicine and then a bronchodilator type of medicine in a single puff. As you can, and these inhalers, and there's different varieties of this type of inhaler. Symbicort is just one. Advair is another example. Dulera is another example. There's about 5 of these on the market, 5 brands on the market now. To my knowledge, even though these have been around for 20 years, it's still almost impossible to get a generic form of this, which is crazy. And from the very beginning, this really price tag shock first hit me with these medicines when I was prescribing these medicines because this is what was indicated, this is what was in the guidelines, and people were saying that medicine costs $300. I couldn't believe it, but that's the case. So Symbicort is a type of patented asthma medicine that many, many people take and need, and there's no affordable generic variety of this or of any of the other ones. And the final one is insulin, and most people here know the story of insulin. And again, this is one where we just saw the price. We have hundreds of people on insulin. And in this case, instead of talking about a single brand medicine like Symbicort or Epclusa, we're talking about a category of medicine. And there are 30 or 40 different insulins that more and more insulins keep coming on the market. And it is amazing how beneficial these medicines can be, but it's equally amazing how they're overpriced and outpriced so that many people who need them either can't get them or may have to make huge family sacrifices to use them. So those are the 6 medicines that MMA is targeting. I just wanted to look at one more slide here. Eve actually might have already shown this slide, which shows how insulin prices kept going up and up and up and up. And for people like me who are practicing, we just couldn't believe it. It was shocking to us. How is it that a medicine that isn't costing any more to the manufacturer can double, quadruple, triple, quintuple in price for so many people who could barely afford food or gas? One more slide I wanted to show. Probably the main thing about this slide, just look at the graph on the left. And it shows you graphically what's happened to the price of insulin. I mean, the ones at the bottom, they're going up too. They're doubling or tripling. This one's going up tenfold. Next slide. A nice way to illustrate this is this slide that comes from one of our Physicians for National Health Program slideshows. The price is wrong. The bottom is the price of one of the most common insulins prescribed today, Lantus Solostar. It's a long-acting insulin, lasts 24 hours. $373, and since this slide was made, it's probably gone up, compared to $64 in England, $67 in Canada, and you can see the other prices in, I think that is Australia, Germany, and France. Next slide. And I wanted to show this slide because Gary already mentioned the lobbying that goes on. The pharmaceutical industry lobbies Congress more heavily than any other industry, and in 2021, $352 million spent on lobbying their products. No wonder No wonder laws are passed that say drug prices will never be negotiated. This is one of the best examples of the extent to which lobbying controls, reelects, prevents reelection of Congress people to a huge degree. So I'll pass it back to you, Eve.
Thank you so much, Dan. I just wanted to plug again our 2 links. Sign our petition at tinyurl.com/MMAWV. And you can also share your healthcare story with us at tinyurl.com/WV stories21. And on that note, I'm going to share a couple of stories, a collection of stories with everyone from real West Virginians.
I would say that the access to healthcare and affordable medication not only greatly decreases one's quality of life, but also unquestionably reduces one's lifespan. I have 3 brothers that are now deceased because they did not have the ability to get the healthcare or medications they needed to keep them alive. I, at 55, have outlived 3 of my 5 brothers because they could not afford to have the medications they needed to keep them alive and to give them a quality of life. So the lack of access to medication, it actually not only decreases quality of life, but literally kills. So I really feel it is critical as a community, as a nation, that we do something to help make medications more affordable. I don't want to see my life snuffed out because I can't access my health care and I can't access blood pressure medication or diabetes medication. And I don't want to see that happen for others either.
I will say, if I was talking to a politician, if he was a diabetic, doesn't he need his insulin? I don't know, because with my mental illness, I need my depression meds and my anxiety meds. So I guess I'm saying is, I want to live. That's all. The beginning part of my experience was very stressful because I didn't think I was going to make it. With depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts, you don't want to do anything with your life. You want to die. After I was able to get my medication, it made a big difference in my life. I mean, it made it difficult. Like I said, I've been pretty much high my whole life, and I'm 29 now, and I have 7 months, and it's because I was able to get all the medication that was prescribed to me. We're trying to live, and so aren't diabetics. It's the same thing. For a diabetic, insulin is to live. People with mental issues or depression medication and stuff is to live.
So I had West Virginia state Medicaid so I could work. It was a program designed for the working disabled. It covered all of my medications. And then when I got a full-time job with the state, I received PEIA and had Medicaid as my secondary. The 2 injections I received as a trial after the Enbrel injection stopped working, then they cost $13,000 a piece. The insurance stated that they wouldn't cover that, and that was more than I made gross income in a full year. They expected me to pay that. Those injections didn't work, so we switched to another medication. It took 4 months for PEIA to approve that medication. they fought that medication coverage for 4 months, which decreased my ability to work. It increased the pain, increased the damage to my joints, and then eventually caused me not to be able to work. And now I've lost my PEIA and I'm back to just Medicaid.
I was in a situation where I was suicidal, and my only option for treatment at the time was to take part in a clinical trial for a new medication. A lack of treatment probably would have been life-threatening for me at that period in time. And it was that treatment that allowed me to take the next step in building my life. But having to go through that means to get treatment shouldn't be the outcome. Treatment should just be the default.
Those are some powerful stories by real West Virginians who are struggling to afford their medications. Tell us what you think about that, Dr. Doyle.
What can I say? We hear those stories day in and day out, and we try to help people find other ways to get what they need. We have even though we are repelled by the drug company, we'll help you get your drug programs. We would help people fill out the forms so that they could get help with some of those medications. And it really is a matter of life and death for a lot of people, as the patients in your stories say.
Thank you. And I think we'll go ahead and start the next video. This video is from Mindy Salango. She's a West Virginian struggling with diabetes.
My name is Mindy Salango, and I live in Monongalia County, West Virginia. So I was employed full-time. I had health insurance through my company. However, due to my divorce and our insurance not being that great and the coverage not covering everything that I needed, my out-of-pocket expenses for my diabetes, including my insulin and supplies, was as much as my mortgage. So for a year, I had to ration my medication. For a diabetic, that is deadly and can lead to long-term complications. Because of that year, I now have diabetic retinopathy. I couldn't make ends meet. And like I said, my insulin cost as much as my mortgage every month. And, I wasn't making great money. I was able to survive, but the last couple weeks of every month were tough, were very tough. And I would have to eat a lot less so that I didn't require as much insulin. And when I say eat a lot less, I mean, I wasn't eating much at all at that time during those couple weeks and each month. And, not taking as much insulin as was required and that my body required to sustain. So my blood sugars would easily be over 300 pretty consistently, over those couple weeks so that I could stretch my insulin out until my next payday. And I've always felt like I was kind of like behind the 8 ball. You would get the mortgage paid or you'd hold off on the electric bill until next month, so that you could get your insulin. I was always behind the 8 ball on something so that I could try to stay alive. And, I'm fortunate that I was able to find another job so that I didn't have to do that any longer. But it was a real juggling act. It was very stressful. Stress will cause your blood sugar to increase. People don't realize it's not just food that makes your blood sugar increase. It's stress, it's hormones, it's, all of those things. And it was a very scary, dark, uncertain time. If I lose my job tomorrow and don't have health insurance, my insulin would cost $1,200 a month, and that's insulin alone. It is, without insurance, insulin is $300 a vial, and a typical type 1 diabetic uses between 3 and 4 vials a month. And that has gone up around between 1,200 and 1,500% over the last 15 years. There's been no change to the formulation. There's been no reason for that cost increase other than greed from the drug companies. When I was first diagnosed 28 years ago, insulin cost about $20 a vial without insurance. Now it's over $300. People are struggling to survive. And then when they have diabetes on top of it, it's almost a no-win game. People have died from rationing. People have died going without insulin because of cost. 1 in 4 diabetics in the type 1 diabetics in the United States currently ration insulin due to cost. I would say in Appalachia, that rate is much higher. And it's sickening to me. It really is, that there's so much emphasis on profit over patients. The original patent for insulin was sold for $1 because the people, the gentleman who discovered it and refined it, said, this doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people who need it. But now it doesn't belong to us at all. Like I said, we're at the will of a drug company representative who wants a big bonus. It's just, this isn't the way that we should live. The job of our government is to take care of its people, specifically its most vulnerable. And we've really been left behind. The healthcare system in general in the United States is abysmal. But for diabetics, we're left. I feel like we've been left behind, and with a deadly disease that we fight every day to stay alive. And I don't know what we need to do to get through, to get something done. I don't know what else we can do. How many casualties of insulin rationing does it take for someone to say, finally, enough's enough? We've lost too many people to this. And people are, coming up with horrible, horrible, lifelong ramifications of rationing their insulin. And when it can be completely avoided, we just have to rein in greed. And until that becomes a priority, we're going to suffer.
We have to rein in greed. And one of the ways that we can do that is by encouraging the Biden administration and Health and Human Services Secretary Becerra to use the government's authority to make use of patents and to relax exclusivity of patents so that we can have more manufacturing by more manufacturers of those drugs. And if we can increase supply, the price is going to go down. Would anybody like to talk about that video a little bit? Any of our presenters?
Well, one thing I would like to emphasize is that there are still far too many people out there without any insurance. And oftentimes we're talking about reducing copays to X amount of money. But those who are uninsured completely and have no access to Medicaid or other programs out there are left hanging and having to pay the full price of whatever drug is, that they're facing. And I think her testimony to that, if you're in between jobs or a life circumstance, just highlights how difficult it is. Also, the fact that insulin, of course, if you don't have what you need, you die, period. And in the first film, it also was quite striking to me because I also lost a sister who was working full-time in Washington, D.C., but was unable to find insurance at the time. No insurance would insure her because she had high blood pressure. And when she left to care for my mother, she was unable to afford the price of her blood pressure medicine and ended up dying. So I know the pain that this can cause, and there are far too many people in this country that are in need of health care that can't access it.
Thank you, Sally. Gary, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just, Mindy's testimony just really hit a nerve and just showed how, inhumane this whole drug monopoly system that we have in this country is. It is a profits over people system, and it's something that this MMA campaign is asking the administration to take the reins and do something about. As we already said, the lawmakers in DC are hobbled by the lobbyists down there, high-paid lobbyists, and the campaign contributions to lawmakers. It's just really skewed public policy to the point where it's all about maximizing the profits of the drug companies and leaving the patients in the dust.
Yes, indeed. I think now might be a good time to look at some questions that were shared in the chat. Norman asks, what is the current position on the change we're proposing by the administration? Their current position is that they are hesitating. They are making excuses. And we have to help them to see that those excuses that they're giving are misleading at best, if not false. In one case, they're trying to say that a department that is under Secretary Becerra would be the one in charge of it, and that they have no control, but he's the head of Health and Human Services. Therefore, he does have the power to move policy change. So we're getting some pushback. We are getting some pushback. And the only way to get past this is with enough people contacting the Biden administration and Secretary Becerra to do something now, because they have done before. It's time they do it now, because wanton, unchecked greed is literally killing people. Looking for some other questions. Kim shares that her daughter's insulin went from $600 a month before insurance in 2009 to almost $1,500 a month in 2017. That is huge. And like Kim said, unscrupulous profiteering.
It also has affected the kinds of drugs that even if you're insured, that your insurance formulary will include these increased prices. So as was mentioned, that some people had been on a variety of types of the similar types of drugs, but they found the one that was able to work for them, because we're all individuals and our chemistry is all individual. They were unable to get that because the insurance company no longer had that in their formulary. I think that's, and part of the reasons they don't are these increased prices. So drugs that I've been able to get, such as Symbicort in the past, have been denied by the insurance periodically. So yes, it's a problem.
Dr. Doyle, would you like to say anything before we wrap up?
Yes, I would like to say something. When I was hearing Mindy Salongo talking and eloquently, and she was saying, what can we do? I'm part of a group called Physicians for a National Health Program, and we have a couple of people who are participating tonight who are actually four people, 5 people, 6 people, if we count panelists, who are participating tonight, who are part of PNHP in West Virginia. And basically, we have a vision, which is improved Medicare for all. That would be similar, probably, I mean, I'd like to say it's similar to Great Britain, to England, but it's probably what would come would be more similar to Canada. And under improved Medicare for all, medications would be covered. People would pay nothing for medicines. Medications are covered in Great Britain, in England. They're not completely covered in Canada, but under the Medicare for all legislation that's before Congress, they would be covered. So what we are working for, what we think the solution is improved Medicare for all, which would mean that the whole healthcare system was nonprofit. There would not be for-profit hospitals. The drug companies would remain as they are, but the healthcare system would be a nonprofit system. There would be a single payer, and if you have a single payer, which would be Medicare, and they would be able to negotiate prices with the federal government, with the manufacturers, as they do now with the VA. And it would be a federal system. So it would be like an expansion of Social Security that completely covered healthcare for everyone. And there would be no more stories like the stories we heard there tonight. The Make Meds Affordable campaign is being done in the hope of a temporary improvement. But long-term, we need a single-payer, nonprofit, federal system that covers everybody, and that's what we are for, and there is legislation before Congress to do that, both before the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you to everyone who came to present today, and for everyone who attended. We will be hosting another webinar on September 8th. And that webinar will be about another layer in the layer cake that is why medications are so expensive. And that layer is pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. Not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but pharmacy and benefit managers, PBMs. They are middlemen, and they make their money between the patients and the pharmacies, and the pharmaceutical companies. So it's already extremely expensive coming from the pharmaceutical companies, making record profits and jacking their prices up to such extreme levels that you're dealing with, like what Mindy said, 1,200% increase in the cost of insulin. So you add to that even more price raise because of pharmacy benefit managers, and they're actually working to squeeze profits out of patients and pharmacies. And we've seen a record number of independently owned pharmacies across West Virginia and across the country close because of unethical predatory practices by PBMs. So we'll be talking about that on September 8th, and we'd love for everyone to come and share the link. And one more time, Jude, if you would share those 2 links for me to share your healthcare story with us at tinyurl.com/WV stories, and to sign our petition to ask Secretary Becerra and the Biden administration to move policy and to make change, to use those march-in rights that they have done before, use their government authority like they have done before, and allow for more generic manufacturing of these drugs. Some of them have been blocked for years from making generics. Others, generics are being produced, but they can only be sold overseas and not in the US. Therein is why people drive all the way to Canada to get their insulin, because they sell it cheaper up there, but they sell it more here because they can. We need to stop that. We need to make change right now. And anything that you can do to help with that would be great. You can sign our petition. You can write letters to the editor. You can actually write letters directly to Secretary Becerra if you are so moved. It's going to take all of us to help redirect this ship in the right direction. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.